Dr. Linda Lagemann, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Now, SSRIs, what are we talking about? What's the names of SSRIs?
Yeah, so the first one, Prozac, and then Paxil, Celexa, Lexapro, all of these.
Zoloft, Chantix.
Yeah. Chantix is used for quitting smoking, but if you read all the warning label of all the adverse effects, it's very much like the SSRI. So it affects the same areas of the brain, it looks like.
Sort of kills me about Chantix that you're trying to quit smoking and add years to your life and you're going to have suicidal thoughts. Anyway, or homicidal thoughts.
That's right, yeah.
How did we get to this position where SSRIs are just being prescribed willy-nilly?
Well, how we got there is direct-to-consumer advertising. Without that, you would not have all these people taking it. So we've had, 17 years now of TV commercials and print ads telling everybody that the struggles they're experiencing in life are actually mental disorders and illnesses that need a medication. Without that, there would be no way we would have 1 in 4 Americans now on a psychiatric drug. Just wouldn't happen. People wouldn't have known about them. I mean, the TV commercials tell people to talk to their doctor. It primes people. You know, in the advertising world, they call those commercials the "you're sick and you didn't know it" ads, because that's what they do. They make people think that what they're experiencing is an illness instead of a life struggle. Even if it's severe, people can have very severe things. People can hear voices, but it's mental and emotional struggle, sometimes spiritual struggle, but it's not medical. And the reason for using the medical language is to market drugs, and that's what's happened. So the SSRI antidepressants that we're talking about, those have been blockbusters. Those have been so successful, the marketing of those, because now when there are studies coming out that haven't been somehow manipulated or paid for by the pharmaceutical industry, even if once removed, because sometimes they pay off a doctor to put their name on something. But now when we have real studies, we see that they actually are not effective. And I know there are going to be people listening who say oh, but it really works for me. The fact is 80% of people on a placebo, on a sugar pill, are going to say the same thing. What's helpful is thinking that you're doing something and focusing on something that you think things are getting better, and you actually can make things better. I mean, we actually have a lot of control in making things better. It's not the pill. Objectively, science, when you break it down, it is not helpful and has tons of adverse reactions. That's the long answer to how we got to all this.
Now, is it safe to say that not all people on SSRIs are going to become mass killers of some sort, but everybody that's a mass killer has been on SSRIs?
Right. Both those statements are true. Obviously, people are not going to take an SSRI necessarily and all of a sudden go, killing a bunch of people. But it is true that all of these killing sprees that there are the toxicology records for, all of them have been on a psychiatric drug or in the withdrawal phase of a psychiatric drug, which is also a really risky time and has the same warnings for violence. I don't know if people know that on the warning labels, the package insert, it actually says that it can increase suicidal thoughts and suicidality, increased violence, and homicidal thoughts. These are no small things. So, yes, everybody who's done one of these, weird kind of killing sprees has been on a drug or been coming off of one of the psychiatric drugs.
I remember when there was this recording. Not everything plays out in violence, but it does change the way a person deals with the outer world. I remember when supposedly Mel Gibson was trying to quit smoking, and he'd been taking Chantix, and they got him recorded on some phone call where he left a voicemail where he's just ranting and raving and just all this stuff. And later on, he'd already gotten in trouble for other things that he had said, but that was just sort of like the icing on the cake. And they brought out the fact that he had taken Chantix, which I don't keep trying. I'm not trying to circle back to Chantix, but that's the most ironic of drugs, where you're trying to save your own life and you kill yourself. So the point I'm leading up to, it doesn't always lead out into gunplay. I mean, has there been studies on people like this guy that the same day one of these shootings happened, I can't remember whether it's Sandy Hook or Aurora, there was a guy at a college in Texas, at Lone Star College, that went on a slashing spree. Mm-hmm. Was he on SSRIs? Or had he taken them in his past, coming off of them? Do we know?
I don't know which. I'd need the name of that person to look it up. I don't know offhand with that one, but I can answer, the overall question. I mean, these killing sprees, it's not necessarily with guns, if that's the question. So it's the common denominator is the psychiatric drugs that are mind-altering drugs. That's even what psychotropic means. It means mind-turning. You have to look at what would make a person do something so against normal, and against their own survival. Because, most of the time in these killing sprees, the person doing it ends up dead. Either they kill themselves or they're clearly going to get killed, and they know that. But what would make a person not have any thought about that? No feeling or connection to people they're killing, no concern or feeling about themselves dying. And that's where you have to look at the psychiatric drugs that can have, and people, they affect different people differently. Like, right? It's not like everybody who takes an Prozac is going to go kill people.
My guest this hour, Dr. Linda Lagemann. I have gone to her before. She is a specialist in SSRIs and what they do to you. You saw a study the other day about what happens to somebody in the brain physiologically when they take just one dosage of Paxil or Zoloft or one of these drugs. What did you find out?
Yeah, that was really surprising, just from a single dose. So this was a study. They took healthy people who were not depressed and who had never been on a psychiatric drug, and they did MRI brain scan of them. So they had the brain image. Then they gave them a single dose of an SSRI antidepressant, the most common kind used now. And 3 hours later, they did another MRI brain scan, and they were very surprised at the drastic changes in the brain. And it's some of the stuff that we've known in terms of the longer-term effects, but here's what they saw. Every area of the brain except two, and I'll come back to that, but every area of the brain except those two was diminished. The communication, they call it functional connectivity, was decreased. That means it cuts the communication in the areas of the brain. So everything is suppressed and impaired except two areas of the brain that have to do with motor function and what's called arousal, meaning like, wake, sleep, kind of agitation, that kind of arousal. So the frontal lobe, which I've spoken about before, is impaired in every psychiatric drug, every single category of psychiatric drug, antidepressants, anti-anxiety, antipsychotic, all of them disable parts of the brain, and specifically the frontal lobe, which is where our thinking is, problem-solving abilities, social connections, like feelings of attachment and connection to other people, all of that. So here it was showing on a brain scan, a brain image, that it cut the connections in that all those areas of the brain except the agitation ones, which had actually increased the motor areas. So this is dramatic. And I want people to know this study was not done by, anti-drug people. Just so you know, I'm reading the study and I'm horrified at what they just did. They're writing about it saying, isn't this fascinating? We need to do more studies like this with people who've never been on a drug and see what effect and blah, blah. Just experimenting. They're just experimenting. They don't know anything. These drugs have been on the market for, let's see, a couple decades now. These antidepressants, since Prozac was the first one, a couple of decades. And they're just now looking and seeing how it's changing the brain and doing damage to every area of the brain is involved. It's just mind-boggling that this has been allowed on the market without them even knowing that they're causing these drastic changes in the brain.
How long is that damage permanent?
Well, that's the thing where there's conflicting.
We don't know. We just started studying it.
That's right. Well, that's actually true. Now, some of the things look to be permanent, but this is where I always hesitate because I am a very big believer in the individual's ability to, regenerate and correct. And I don't want to have any listeners who are taking these or have taken them. I don't want them to, feel cursed like they're forever damaged, because I do believe in the resilience of people. But I also don't want to sugarcoat, and I want people to know the seriousness of this and the alterations in the brain. So, I'm going to leave it at that. If you haven't taken them, don't ever do it, because you are altering your brain. And if you have, then just, good nutrition, good everything else, and try to, regenerate.
One of the things you point out for people that have taken them, if they are feeling bad or whatever, or if you're just feeling bad and you're afraid you might need to take them, is exercise.
Yeah, that's the best. Exercise, by all studies, exercise is the single best treatment for depression. And you don't complicate it. You're just going to be improving your life. You're going to be improving your health and your mood without any adverse, kind of complications. The SSRI antidepressants are given for just the most benign things, even though they are so damaging. And we're only, getting more familiar with how damaging they are now. But, somebody who is depressed because they're feeling depressed because they're bald, anybody can go talk to a doctor about feeling down about anything, and it is just almost automatic. It's very easy for these docs to just prescribe the antidepressants because they've been told they're safe.
The same doctor you would go to for the flu.
That's right. Somewhere between 70 and 80% of psychiatric drugs are actually prescribed by general practitioners. And they've actually been told to do that by the psychiatric experts. So that, it goes back to that. But the people with the conflict of interest who have ties to the pharmaceutical industry.
How many of those doctors get visited by pharmaceutical reps and make money off the prescribing of the drugs?
Oh, like tons. There are a lot of them do. There's actually a brand new federal website that shows the payouts by the drug companies to doctors. So people can look up. We can come back to this, but people can look up, is their doctor getting money from the drug company? And just in the last 3 months of 2013, they saw that there were $3.5 billion was paid out by the drug companies to doctors, individual doctors. There were 546,000 doctors who received money, and the total of the money given was $3.5 billion, just in the last 5 months of 2013 when they started tracking this.
The last 5 months.
5 months.
So it's probably closer to $8 billion over the course of that year, huh?
Well, yeah, I guess so. Yes, that's right. So this is payouts to get doctors and to induce them to prescribe more of a drug and to prescribe it what's called off-label. That's how you can have children on antipsychotics, SSRI, any drug. These are all off-label prescriptions, and that's what they're paid to do. And there are a lot of Department of Justice cases about this, but they're not deterrents. Nobody's gone to jail over this. In the U.S. In China, they actually have put some people in jail now. But in the U.S., nobody goes to jail. They just get fined. They pay a bunch of money, but it's a drop in the bucket. This is $89 billion industry, I think.
My guest this hour, Dr. Linda Lagemann. We're talking about SSRIs. Let me ask you a question regarding treatment. If somebody has the wherewithal to recognize that they have something going on mentally, and they seek out treatment, we know that they're going to just pull out the prescription pad. But there is other protocols to treating somebody that's a little more involved and probably takes more time in front of the psychiatrist or the psychologist, isn't there? I mean, there's other things they can do besides prescriptions, aren't there?
For sure. And, even to look back to before we had all these pharmaceuticals, it's not like, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it's not like we were a country crippled by depression and anxiety and, psychosis. That's not the case. There are plenty of things. And in fact, first, just do no harm. And right now, contrary to popular belief and everything we've been, just bombarded with indoctrinating us about psychiatric drugs, so contrary to all of that, the psychiatric drugs actually do harm and they actually make things worse. And ironically, every category of drug worsens the condition that it is being prescribed for. Antidepressants worsen depression. They actually create chronic depression by altering the chemicals and changing the brain in some of the ways we were just talking about. Anti-anxiety drugs, same thing. It's common sense. We've kind of gotten away from common sense as we are listening to authorities, experts. We grant them so much power, and they don't know what they're doing. They really don't. And people should go back to their own common sense. A parent knows that it's not a good idea to give a mind-altering drug to their child. And unless they're, convinced and told that this expert knows the mind and knows what's better, they would never do that. And people wouldn't take it themselves. People, like I said, we are much worse off now because of the psychiatric drugs than before they came on the scene. More depression, more people on disability for mental illness, more people who end up on the street because of mental illness. It's created by the drugs.
One thing that you sent me an email about as far as the way things are treated nowadays and people that don't know what they're doing, you talked about the Alabama incident where a 5-year-old was forced to sign a non-suicide homicide contract.
Yeah.
Just exactly how effective was that in keeping this little girl who doesn't know what suicide or homicide or any other thing that ends in IDE means yet? She signed her name with her Crayola. Yeah. How effective was that? I mean, this little girl doesn't have an issue, and now they've, I guess, made one.
Yeah. This is where you see that because there's no actual science involved in the mental health field, no labs, nothing that's really objective. It's completely subjective, and so then it's entirely vulnerable to bias and stupidity and prejudice. So that's just completely ridiculous. Yeah, they did one of these mental health screenings on her then and asked her these questions about suicide and homicide. The bottom line is the mental health screening that goes on in schools is a marketing. It's like the pharmaceutical company trolling for customers. These mental health screening tests that have no business being in the schools. It is not the federal government's job to be screening anybody's mental health. Those tests have been written by psychiatrists, paid by the pharmaceutical industry, and they are written in such a way that people are going to end up looking like they need treatment. They're going to, answer yes to questions that most people would answer yes to, and then they get flagged as being suicidal or homicidal. This is going on now, and it's another whole topic, but that people should be aware occurs so that they can let their schools know they do not want their child to be mental health screened, because they have taken children, Child Protective Services has taken children away from parents because they come out testing as like, oh, this kid is, homicidal or suicidal. The abuse is really profound with that.
Could this possibly lead to Rebecca, the little girl who had this, or Elizabeth rather, Rebecca was the mom, to Elizabeth being medicated, or they demand that she's medicated or something? And just out of curiosity, under what authority are school people getting out there and making these calls?
They can. And yes, there are cases where people have been told your kid needs to be on a psychiatric drug. The parent has said, no, that's not a good idea. I don't want my child on that drug. And they have charged the parents with medical neglect and taken the child and forced the drug. There are a number of cases. This is one of the big ones that's been going on is happened in Detroit. It was a mother, Marianne Godboldo, and she, her 12-year-old went through one of these school screenings where they round up all the kids, take them to the auditorium, do a mental health screening, and it said her daughter was suicidal. Her daughter was not suicidal, but they took the child directly from the school to a psychiatric institution, and the mother agreed. I'm blending two cases. Sorry about that, because there are a number of these cases. There was another parent whose kid was taken directly from the school. Marianne Godboldo, her kid wasn't taken directly from the school, but she was told her kid needed to be put on Risperdal, which is an antipsychotic, very powerful. She did it temporarily. It made her daughter aggressive and had adverse reactions. She talked to a doctor, and the doctor tapered her off it. The psychiatrist with the school, with child protector, didn't like that. They literally came with a SWAT team and took her daughter. There's the footage of this. It's on YouTube where the entire SWAT team, a tank, came to this mom who was just trying to exert her own rights after having observed what this drug did to her child and saying, I don't want my kid on this. They took the kid. Now, 9 months later, 10 legal battles, and they ruled that it was not right to take her daughter, but they already then forced the drug on her kid and had her institutionalized for, 9 months. So the abuses of this, and this is, again, because there's no science involved here, this is just one person. You can get one doc who says, yes, she needs this drug. And that's enough. That's enough to take a kid. So we really have to look at the phenomenal power that psychiatry, that industry has right now, and the abuses of that. I've left you speechless.
It's just so wrong that they. Well, has anything well, we're coming up on the next break. How will people find out what you do, what you write, what you talk about? How can people find that?
They can go to a couple of websites. But I'm a commissioner for Citizens Commission on Human Rights, and I really want people to have that website, which is CCHRINT.org. That's Citizens Commission on Human Rights International. So CCHRINT.org, and then CCHR.org. And then my website, where people can get in touch with me, is drlagemann.com, and that's DRLAGEMANN, drlagemann.com.
This is Lock and Load. My guest this hour, Dr. Linda Lagemann, who actually caught me so off guard with something. She told me that I was speechless for a while, which is never good in talk radio. That is never good. Let me ask you a question. Given the fact that they use these incidents, which are very rare, these mass shooting, spree shooting incidents, the type of Aurora, Virginia Tech, that kind of thing. Given that those are so very rare, but this is where they go to for the gun control meme, and this is proof that we need to ban this or that or the other. While at the same time, this classification of drugs, which all of these guys have in common, is the common thread. Is there something more at work here than just a bunch of, is it partially greed and partially agenda? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think for some, both of those and more. I think there's greed is a huge factor that's going on, and that's probably what's most of the people are involved in. It's greed. Then you have the few people who are really kind of controlling things, and it's about control. Ultimately, it's about control, both psychologically, numbing and controlling the population. And then this issue, you can distract people with bringing up gun control, because that is a polarizing issue in this country. Second Amendment rights and gun control. You get people distracted fighting about that. More recently, you get people distracted fighting about, you've had people say, you were mentioning to me, people saying, oh, you shouldn't talk about this in the media because then you're going to get copycat killers. It's another way of distracting and fear-mongering and saying, fear-mongering, anything where you're going to say that something is unspeakable, that is contributing to a fear-mongering thing.
Right.
It is speakable. We need to be talking about this. We need to be upfront about what are the common denominators, because the common denominator are the psychiatric drugs and killing. All the killings are not even happening with guns. So we have to look at what makes a person do this. And we were talking a little bit earlier about some of the changes in the brain. When you take one of these drugs and you cut somebody's feelings of social connection and their sense of reality of themselves and others, you increase their agitation, their impulsivity, you impair their judgment, make them emotionally numb, irritable, hostile, add suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, and you're going to have X percent of those people where it is enough to push them over the edge to do one of these things. So whenever this happens, I mean, there's distraction that people use to keep it away from the psychiatric drugs, and actually then behind the scenes, you know, the American Psychiatric Association has lobbyists, the pharmaceutical industry has lobbyists on Capitol Hill, pushing for, you know, using these incidents to push for more mental health screening, more psychiatric drugs, and ultimately this is about, to me, I'm tracking the issue of psychiatry and their control, because then you have who's going to decide gun ownership. Well, that's going to be psychiatry based on labels that have no science behind them, but labeling somebody with a mental disorder is going to be a factor in whether that person can carry a firearm or not. That's the overview of it.
Well, I mean, the question I have, I actually have two. Why legislatively why isn't Congress looking at who's decided? You know, you've got general practitioners who are closer to maybe possibly hitting a bullseye with general doctors, even though they don't know what they're doing, and they prescribe it just to get you out of the office and get the next copay in there. And then you've got schools out there that they're not even doing what they're supposed to do, much less know how to prescribe or diagnose a mental health issue. Is Congress looking at this at all? Has anybody ever looked at this? Have they ever said, well, you know, not all SSRI users are spree killers, mass shooters, but all mass shooters are SSRI users. Have they never done that? I mean, I've heard that argument in different forms, 1,000 different ways.
The thing is, they are flooded with so much false information. I've actually been on Capitol Hill now a number of times and met with some Congress people there. Like I said, there are actually, I didn't give the number, but there are it's like over 1,200 pharmaceutical lobbyists on Capitol Hill.
Wow.
And then there are also the American Psychiatric Association lobbyists there. So they get so much false information, just like the general public does. There's just important information, like the link between SSRIs and suicide and violence, which is known. It's on the FDA drug warning label, and that's known, and Department of Justice cases showing all the payouts to make doctors prescribe them to more and more people and to children. That's known because we've got Department of Justice cases. But this important information is buried under an avalanche of just garbage information in the news. So it's not known like it should be, because it's the important data, but when you flood it with a bunch of irrelevant and false data, it just gets lost. I think obviously there's some people who are bought, their votes are bought, and then I think there are many who just can't see the info because it's buried, and it's really a challenge to get focused on the correct cause and effect. But like I said, it's not debatable. People make it seem like it's debatable, but you can't get an FDA black box warning without there being proof of cause and effect. And that's
right.
What we have now, the SSRIs and suicide and violence. You know, none of these people were in treatment because they had homicidal ideation. None of them. They're in treatment because they have learning problems, or they're awkward in school, or there's depressed feelings because somebody, you know, whatever, all the regular things. That's how they start in treatment. Then their mind gets changed, and they get weirder, and they get more impaired, and then they get suicidal and homicidal. They weren't in treatment for homicidal ideation. None of them.
Right.
If it were,
right.
that would be front page, because that'd be the easiest way to just blow all this out, was to prove that they were being treated for homicidal ideation. Drugs created that.
Does Dylan Quick, the name Dylan Quick, did that flit across your radar? That was the Lone Star Stabber. If he didn't, he probably ought to have. He had fantasies about killing people since he was 5. His whole goal, one of the things he wanted to accomplish at Lone Star College or Lone Star University, was cut off faces and wear them for masks. He used an X-Acto knife in his slashing, and he was so violent with it that he left parts of the X-Acto knife in some of his victims. So he sort of sounds like somebody that had taken the SSRI to me.
All the little weird things. They usually are the SSRIs because they really do disconnect people from reality.
Does that make them more susceptible to this whole copycat thing if they see something, hey, I sort of dig that?
SSRIs are going to make it easier to push somebody over the edge to where they would do something.
Right.
So, yeah, it doesn't, hearing about a story does not make somebody do it. Just like, watching a video game is not going to make somebody go on a killing spree. But you got to look at what would put a person over the edge, what's going to change them psychologically. And that's where you're looking at the psychotropic drugs, which are mind-changing, mind-altering drugs. So, yeah, I'm going to look this guy up. But, often you get kids may start with an ADHD drug on a young kid, and then that gets them the adverse effects of the ADHD drug might make them depressed, and then they add an antidepressant, then they add an antipsychotic, and before you know it, the kid's on a cocktail of drugs and is completely not a normal person anymore.
There you go, Doc. We'll do this again. So much.
Perfect.
Only Good. So much territory can be covered in an hour. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Do you sometimes feel a bit blah? No matter what you do, just blah. You may have tripolar disorder. Don't worry, we've got a drug for that. Side effects may include anxiety, delusions, hallucinations, emotional numbing, uncontrollable shaking, weight gain, mania, psychosis, suicidal tendencies, homicidal ideation, panic attacks, and paranoia.
From the age of 10, docs pumped mind-altering meds into Adam Lanza. Pretty much every school shooter in the past decade was on prescription drugs. On antidepressants, kids are 10 times more likely to get violent. Suicides are even more widespread.
You take a mortal man, you put him on psychotropics, have him play violent video games, and join the military. Starts to hear voices. He gets through 2 checkpoints because he has a top secret security clearance. Shoots a bunch of people. So now America has to turn its guns in. Because Dianne Feinstein has the moral high ground. Just like Nazi Germany, they'll take our guns. Because Obama loves the children, turn in your guns right now. Acting like a robot.
Politicians forcing Pharmageddon on Americans.
How about Prozac? The number one, that's the big sponsor, isn't it? Or that whole class of drugs.
Let me ask you a question.
Oh, got to cut that off, don't you? Don't want to talk about the U.S. number one cause of death is suicide now because they give people suicide mass murder pills.
Calm down.
Your answer is give more money to the psychiatrists and psychologists to put more crazy people on drugs that make them kill people, Pierce.
Let's try.
Walking, eating, driving, or engaging in other activities while asleep without remembering it the next day have been reported. Abnormal behaviors may include aggressiveness, agitation, hallucinations, or confusion. In depressed patients, worsening of depression, including risk of suicide, may occur. Alcohol may increase these risks.
When a mother chops her kids up with a cleaver because she's on serotonin...
Tell me why I'm wrong.
Why don't you want to get rid of the drugs? Because they're half your sponsors?
Suicide and malformations mainstream media won't report because for every dollar drug firms spend on research, they hand out 19 times more to media on commercials. Big-Pharma shills an astonishing $100 billion on ads to brainwash you into buying. Top spender is Pfizer with this notorious antidepressant Zoloft. Mainstream media gratefully pockets the fortune, and who cares about the viewers?
The industry is responsible to Wall Street.
America's number one cause of unnatural death now is suicide.
Alex,
Not automobile accident, not cancer, not...
You
Listen,
accuse me of attacking the Second Amendment of the Constitution.
I want to get people off pills that the insert says will make you commit suicide and kill people.
Alex, let's get about to the Second Amendment.
I want to blame the real culprit.
Alex.
Suicide pills.
Alex.
Mass murder pills.
Okay.
In your son's situation, I would recommend that we go with medication. We can start him off with these. Side effects include mania, aggression, hostility, psychosis, homicidal ideation. At least 8 of the recent school shooters have taken these. Let's see. We've got Springfield, Oregon school shootings, the Red Lake, Minnesota school murders, and, the Columbine massacre. But it's really up to you.
Have you been diagnosed with depression and struggle with sadness?
Maybe you're scared of being criticized.
Ask your doctor about Effects or Exile. Ask your doctor about Cymbalta.
Talk to your doctor about Zoloft.
So talk to your healthcare professional.
Your doctor today. Your doctor. Tell your doctor. Contact your doctor immediately. Talk with your doctor.
Every day, psychotropic drugs cause serious adverse reactions. And while psychiatrists and drug companies fully understand the dangers of the drugs they sell, their unsuspecting customers are left to suffer the consequences.
Everything became worse. Each mood swing was worse.
He would have chronic headaches, chronic, nausea, not feeling good.
She was very agitated, very, very jumpy.
She was having horrible hallucinations. Her personality was disintegrating.
Once he started on that drug, the cloud just stayed over him and stayed over him and stayed over him. It got darker and darker.
He thought there wasn't anything worth living to kill himself. That was not Matthew. That was the drugs.
At least I would like to have said, I love you. I didn't get a chance to do that.
In addition to crippling scores of people daily, every month, psychiatric drugs kill an estimated 3,000. But the human devastation would never have gotten this high if psychiatrists hadn't worked hand in hand with drug companies to promote their drugs to doctors throughout the world. Today, 70% of all psychiatric drugs are prescribed by general physicians. And how is this accomplished? Marketing.
It's about creating a good story that uses science, that convinces a physician to think about writing a prescription.
This is not science. This is incredibly effective marketing. It has nothing to do with science.
They use what I call statistical contortionism. Basically just skew the numbers, make everything look fantastic. You hide the bad numbers.
They're learning every trick in the book. They're evolving into efficient marketing machines, and it's working.
There's definitely an unholy alliance between psychiatry and pharmaceutical sales. That's a marriage made in heaven.
They're like conjoined twins. They're joined at the wallet.
And with 374 mental disorders filling psychiatry's diagnostic manual and more on the way, business is booming. Pharmaceutical companies have expanded their roster of psychotropic drugs from 44 in 1966 to 174 today. The top 5 psychotropic drugs combined gross more money than the gross national product of each of over half the countries on Earth. Altogether, the psychiatric industry rakes in $1/3 of $1 trillion a year. How could this have happened? It's a tale of deception that may be difficult to believe, but fatal to ignore.